Welcome to Configuring ScreenOS Firewalls. This is the lesson on basic policy configuration. Policy, as we discussed earlier, is the terminology that ScreenOS uses for the rule sets that a firewall applies to traffic that passes through it. As we mentioned earlier, all firewalls perform actions based on a set of rules for the traffic that passes through them. In ScreenOS, those rules are known as policies. So a policy is what you will configure to control traffic through the device. So the objectives then of this session are to review the security policy functionality and show how it is set up in ScreenOS, to show you how to configure a basic policy, to understand the elements that go into creating a policy, which would be the address book entries, the services, and how you can use multi-cell or groups to apply multiple of these to a single policy. And to discuss some of the common issues that will come up when you create policies and how to identify them. And we will talk about the global policy. We mentioned before that this global zone exists. That is sort of the fallback when nothing else applies. So we'll discuss how that works. And finally, how to verify. You'll understand how to verify that policies are doing what you think they should be doing on the device. So when this session is over, you should be able to understand all of these elements and work with them on the ScreenOS. Okay, so this is our organization for the material. We're going to start with functionality, move on to configuration problems, then talk about global policy and verifying. So beginning with functionality. This basic functionality of a security policy is a single rule. Each policy is a single rule to control traffic. Those rules are going to be based on source, destination, and service. So we are essentially talking about IP addresses and ports that are being controlled. And when you create the rule, you're going to be identifying where it's coming from, where it's going to in the service. Now in ScreenOS, in addition to IP address, your IP addresses are also, of course, coming in from zones. So your policies have this zone relationship as well. You're either going from zone to zone or within the same zone. Returning to our basic office for securities and zones, we see there can be this relationship between them. If your traffic is going through the firewall from zone A to zone B, between two different zones, inter-zone traffic, they will always be checked to see if there's a policy that permits that traffic. So every piece of traffic from one zone to a different zone must have a policy configured to allow it. If the traffic is going through the firewall and is within the same zone, then it might be checked. Intra-zone traffic. Now, the important thing to remember with controlling intra-zone traffic is to remember your rules of Ethernet communications. The firewall can only apply rules to traffic it can see. So if you have all these computers in the regional office sitting in zone A, and there's a whole bunch of switches there in zone A, and then an uplink port from zone A to Ethernet 01 to the firewall, those computers can communicate with each other via ARP in that subnet on those switches, and that traffic will never be seen by the firewall. So if you have intra-zone traffic that you want to apply rules to, you need to make sure that the traffic must transit the firewall to occur. So for example, in this setup here, you have a headquarters zone, 10, 20, 10, 24. If that zone is set up on the SSG20 in the regional office to be in either Zone A, Zone B, or Zone C, so that from the perspective of the SSG20 it's the same zone as one of these other zones, then all that traffic that's going to come from Zone A to headquarters zone will have to go through the SSG20, and therefore you can write a Zone A to Zone A intra-zone policy that will always apply to the traffic making that trip. On the local side, you can accomplish the same thing. Suppose you have a group of computers that you need to protect with an intra-zone policy, but you want them to be in the same zone as Zone A. What you can do then to make sure that traffic goes through the firewall is you can use that B group functionality that we talked about earlier, put two firewall interfaces into a B group, have a switch or a VLAN that connects to one set of those computers that have to be protected, and then the other port connects to all the other switches in the device. That way, any communication that goes to that first group of computers has to go through that bridge group on the firewall, and since it has to transit the firewall, then your intra-zone rule can be applied. So if you're using intra-zone traffic, you have to make sure, or intra-zone policies, you have to make sure that your Ethernet traffic is routed in a way that the firewall can see, intercept, and apply the rules you want to apply. Okay, so what are the components of a policy? We have a source and destination address. So in these boxes here across the top, this is a policy from trust to untrust going out. The first two boxes are source and destination. The any object means absolutely anything coming from that zone. So this is trust to untrust. The source is a trust. Anything from trust to anything in untrust. You can use this any object if it's a broad rule. If it's not a broad rule, you have to create either an address book entry or an address group to group a set of addresses together, and then that will be what is selected in the source and destination. The service, again, there is an any service to allow absolutely anything. There is a list of predefined services like HTTP, FTP, etc. that are there. And if the service you want to use is not available in the predefined, you can create it in the custom services. And you can create groups. So if you have a policy that needs to apply to, say, HTTP, HTTPS, FTP, all these web protocols for a server, say, that's publishing websites in FTP, you can create a group of those services together to use in a single policy. And there is an action. So you can permit, you can deny, you can select a VPN tunnel that this is going to apply, send the traffic to, or you can reject the traffic. So these are the basic constructs of a policy. The options we're going to talk about in the advanced section, and we'll get into how you arrange and move things in the policies later as well. So these are the fundamental elements you need for a policy. You need a source and destination, you need a service, and you need an action. Those are the three required elements to create a policy in ScreenOS. So these options that we'll review in the later lessons allow you to add traffic logs and counters, allow you to schedule the use of a policy during certain times of day, and allow you to restrict a policy to user authentication. All of these will be dealt with in the advanced policy options lesson. Okay, so on this session, we're going to look at how to configure those required elements of a basic policy. There is a procedure then that you're going to follow. You're going to create any address book entries you need in the zone where the addresses occur so that you can use them in the policy. You then are going to define any services you need that are not available in the built-in services so that you can use them in that policy. Then you create the actual policy entry using the address book and the services for your source and destination and what's there. And then you arrange the policies into the order that you need them. Order is important in policy actions. You're going to create a rule set on the firewall, and that rule set is going to be processed in order from top to bottom. And the way the rule set is handled in a firewall is the first match and you're done. So as soon as traffic matches a policy, it applies that policy and it stops processing any further policies. So you need to make sure that your policies are ordered in a way that you don't inadvertently process traffic the way you don't want to. For example, suppose you want to have a rule that blocks web traffic from a zone to the internet, but there's exceptions to that. And the exceptions then are going to be specific computers or a specific subsection of that subnet. You will need to make sure that the exception rule is first to allow those people, and then the deny rule is second. Otherwise, everything gets denied and processing stops. So the order of the processing is important. First match and you're done. It's not like routing where the most specific match always wins. First match and you're out. Processing order matters. Okay, so step one is going to be to create some address book entries. These are you need to create address book entries for hosts that have access requirements, and you might have to create multiples of these entries. These can be subnets with the same access requirements, so everything you're going to put into a zone, and you're going to handle everything in the zone the same way, right? That we talked about earlier, how we group hosts in zones. So you need to create all of the subnets or individual hosts that you're going to write rules for. You're going to create then groups to aggregate hosts and subnets for rules. So say you have a rule that needs to apply to 5 hosts in a subnet, you would need to create 5 individual host address book entries and then a group to put all 5 of those hosts into. Then you can use the group in the creation of your policy. So to actually create these entries, in the address book. From the from the CLI, we use the set address command, followed by the zone, followed by the name of the address object, and then followed by the address. So set address trust, local LAN 192.168.1.0/24. Set address untrust, Google, www.google.com. ScreenOS, if DNS is configured, can use DNS names in addition to IP addresses. On the web, this is under Policy Elements, Address, List, and then New. So List will give you the list of all the currently configured addresses, and then New to create a new one. In the new form, you give it the name, you include the address, and you assign it to the zone. So very straightforward. You create all the addresses that are necessary for the policy you're doing. In order to see what you've created in the addresses, you use the get address command. So when you do get address, it pulls back then the list of configured addresses on your device and tells you what their names are. On the web, this listing looks like this in the tabular format, and you have these filter buttons across the top to click on to pull shorter lists forward alphabetically. Okay, to define a custom service, you will need to know the protocol and port of the traffic that you need to create the services for. You will then generate this list of custom services you need. You can check against the built-in list and see what's not there, so that you can know what you need to create. And then you could create groups to aggregate services for a single rule if you need to. So to take a look at the predefined services, it's get service predefined on the command line, and you can see some of the predefined services here and what their names are. So you would need to know then this name to be able to reference it in the policy you're about to create. On the web, this is under Policy Elements again. Policy Elements Services, and predefined, and then that pulls down, a tabular list that shows you the predefined services that are available for your use in policies. So you go here, you've got your list of services that you're going to need to allow in your policy. You go here first and say, are these services already defined for me, or are they something I need to create? So to create those custom services that aren't available, you go to the set command, service, give it its custom name, protocol, TCP or UDP, and the destination port to create the service. By default then it'll assign the entire range to the source port, so any source port going to your custom destination port. In the web interface, this is also under Policy Elements Services. You go to the custom and create a new one, and you can see that your new service can be filled out in here. The single service can have multiple ports associated with it. Okay, so now we have our address book entries and our service entries ready to go, and we're able then to create our policy. The policy configuration would be set policy from zone, from trust, to zone, to untrust, name of the policy, we're calling local LAN, any, this is HTTP and permit. So we have set policy from the trust zone to the untrust zone using the local LAN address object to any address using HTTP protocol and permit the traffic. So that's the order of the elements in the command line. In the web, this is under policies. Before you can create it, you have to select this first thing, trust to untrust. When you first go into policies, it lists all the policies from all of the zones. So you have to narrow it first from the two zones you're going to create the policy from and to, left to right. Then when you click the new button, you get to select then the from address, local LAN, the to address any, the service, HTTP, and or whatever's necessary, and then the action is in the pull down list there. We're permitting this traffic. So those are the required elements of a basic policy. Once the policy exists, we can order them with everything else. New policies on the web are automatically put at the end of all the policies that exist. When you create a new policy on the web, there's an action button you can check to force it to be the first policy. So it can be the first or the last. Anywhere else, it'll have to be moved. The default rule between any zones is to deny traffic. So from zone to zone, the default rule at the bottom of the policy list, if nothing else matches, the traffic will be denied. And again, the order matters. First match and we're done. So they have to be arranged in the correct order. So how do we reorder the policies? On the command line, you get the policy number by get policy, and you look at the ID number. And then we use the move command. So set policy, move 3 before 10. We'll take policy number 3 and put it in front of policy number 10. On the web, when you get the policy list, there's a little arrow on the right-hand side. When you click that arrow, you get this interface that shows, in this case, we're going to move policy 6, and wherever we click on the arrow on the left is where it's going to put it before or after the other existing policies. So by clicking on the arrow on the right, we get this interface, and then we click on the arrow on the left to show where to insert the policy that we're moving. In this case, we're moving policy 6 to one of these 4 locations. Okay, an alternative to groups is multi-cell selection. We've mentioned already that we can have address groups to put multiple addresses onto the same policy. But within a policy, you can also select multiple cells to have multiple address objects selected in a policy. And likewise in services. If you don't use the service group, you can go in and do a multi-cell selection in a policy to put multiple services on the same policy. But however you do it, if you have a multiple addresses or multiple services, you don't need to create multiple policies. You can create a single policy and apply that same policy to multiple addresses or multiple services. So looking at address groups, you can group hosts or subnets together in a group. It doesn't matter as long as they have an address entry. They will then be treated as a single group as a single entity for the policy. All of the policy will apply to each individual element of the group. And they will appear as a single selection in source and destination when you create a policy. So groups are nice, clean, and neat. You select a single entry, and there it is. All of the members of that group will apply. So let's look at creating the address groups. On the command line, set group address, the zone, the name, and then add the name of the address that you're adding. So in this case, we're adding an address called local LAN and an address called server to a group called local group in the trust zone. On the web, this is under policy elements, addresses. There's a section for group. You select the zone and you click new or edit, and here we've pulled in group members, local LAN and server, and a group name called local group. To take a look at these elements, we can get address group and zone, get address group trust, and that shows us two groups here that have been user defined. In the web, this is under policy elements. Just by selecting the zone, it will list in the table the groups that are created for that zone. The process is pretty much the same for services. We can create a service group by set group service, and we're adding HTTP to a group called custom here. And under policy elements services groups, you get this same interface to add, say, HTTP, HTTPS, and FTP to a group called custom. To see the service groups, on the CLI, it's get group service, and on the web, policy elements services groups, list them out what's available here. These are there are some predefined groups available for your use as well as the custom groups that you can create. To use multi-cell selection within a policy, I mentioned before, you don't have to use groups. You can select multiple addresses or multiple services as an alternative. When you multiple select the items at the time of policy creation, these will apply then the policy in the same way groups do without having to create the group. So to do multiple policy selection, we get into the policy that you're going to be changing. In this case, we're going into policy ID 8, and of course you can get the IDs of your policies by doing your get policy list. And then you'll see the prompt changes here on the command line. So it shows us we are changing things within policy number 8 structure. And we can just go ahead and set multiple services, HTTPS, HTTP, and FTP. On the web, you click on that multiple button for services and you get this presented. You can pull over multiple service entries for the policy, and then this will apply to the policy then in the same way that the command line does. So this is the multiple button next to the service in order to select multiples. If you want to see What's in a policy? When you do the standard get policy, it will list all those services that are there on the command line. And likewise, when the policy is listed in the web, the list of services multiple selected are listed in the box here. In order to change what's been set, you just use the unset command, or this to remove things that are in there, or the set command to add more after you've entered the policy. Or you go back into that multiple selection, and you can either, using the left or right arrows here, add more or remove. Okay, you've created policies, applied the addresses and ports that you want them to apply to. What are some of the common things that can go wrong with the application of policies? Common problem is the ordering of policies. You can have large address groups and single hosts, and sometimes the host will be hitting the address group first, and so that the broader policy is applying instead of the narrow one. So you have to reorder the policies to make sure the correct policy is applying to the traffic you want it to. You have to remember that these address and service names are not the same as the actual name. So sometimes, depending on your naming convention, you may be naming things as their text name the same as their IP address or that sort of thing. There can be typos in the name that are not necessarily reflected in the actual address. The name is a convention for the person programming the firewall. It is not used by the firewall to determine if there's a match. Only the address matters. So make sure the underlying IP address to these address book entries is what you really think it is. And group memberships. When you apply a group to a policy, you might forget to add new members of the group as they come online or created. So you have to watch for that. Names versus address. Remember, the name is a label, not the actual address. So this says server. The actual address that's being processed is 192.168.128.2, and that's in our address list. You'll notice if you mouse over in a policy on a web, it will show you what the address is. So these any's, if one of those were an address object, say server, if you hover over that name in the policy, a little pop-up balloon will appear with the underlying address, so you can confirm that the address is indeed the one that you want it to be referring to. Group membership. Policies will display the address group name and not the actual addresses. So you won't be able to see then, using this hover technique, the addresses that are in a group. So make sure your names are descriptive and don't overlap, so that it's clear which one you have to pick. And you will have to look up the group members during troubleshooting. If it's not applying and you're using groups, one of the early steps you want to do is go into the group membership list and make sure the addresses you're troubleshooting with are indeed members of the groups you believe they are members of. Okay, modifying, removing policies, addresses, or services. You can modify these using the set unset commands on the command line. And in the web, you have the edit option. To remove a policy or elements of a policy, you cannot remove objects that are in use. So if an address or a service is used by a policy, you have to remove the policy first, and then you can remove the address or the service. In the CLI, we use the unset command to remove things, and in the web, there's an actual remove button. You can temporarily disable policies. There's a checkbox on the web that allows you to tell it to no longer process the rule but not actually delete the rule, so you can use it later. This can sometimes be helpful if you want to see if a policy is having an effect. If you turn it off and the operations of the traffic change, then you know that policy is involved in the issue. When you list them on the web, they will gray them out then to show you that they, to highlight for you that that policy is not being acted on. So this can be used for things that you grant temporary access for, and that the temporary access happens periodically, so you can have the policy deployed and in place, and turn it on when it's needed and turn it off when it's not. The address objects and services in those policies will still be in use, so you cannot remove them if the policy is just disabled. Okay, the global policy. The global policy will apply to the global zone. The global zone is where we check if there is no match anywhere else in the system, zone to zone. So if we don't know where to place traffic in our zone structure, we're going to fall back on the global policy. So here we show in the flow chart, is there a zone policy match? Yes, then we're going to apply the zone policy. If there's no zone policy match, then we're going to check the global policies. If there's a global policy match, then we'll apply that policy. If not, we take the default action, which is to deny the traffic. So these the global zone will only be checked if there's been no policy match in any of the zone policies. And the default is there are no policies in the global zone, so that means there will deny the traffic. You can configure any global policies that you want to allow a host or other traffic. So if you have something that some traffic that's not going to hit your policies, and you want to configure this in the global zone, you can allow the traffic there. This will be an extremely rare circumstance. You generally don't want to be creating global rules unless there's particular issues occurring with policies where you're actually getting the message that this is being denied by the global policy, and therefore you have to create a global policy to allow the traffic. Okay, verified policy operations. There are some troubleshooting commands that we have available to us. You saw in the previous session the debug flow basic made a lot of references to the policies that are being executed. So you definitely, if you're having issues with traffic, you do want to run debug flow basic and see what zone to zone is being identified for the traffic and what policy is being applied to the traffic. So the debug flow basic is your primary tool. You can also use get session if the traffic has been permitted and is active in the session table. You can see what session the traffic is in. and look at the details of that. Zone and policy troubleshooting. We have some commands available. Get zone will get you the IDs then of the zones you're coming in. You're going to use get policy to get the IDs of the policies that you want to troubleshoot, so you can use these IDs. And your get policy global if you have global zone policies. So these commands will get you the ID numbers you need for interpreting the debug flow. The debug flow is going to say from zone 102 to zone 1, as we saw in the previous lesson. So you're going to need to know what is zone 102, what is zone 1. You can search policies. Sometimes your firewall may have a very large rule set applied to it, and so you might have trouble finding what it is you're looking for. Get policy using the pipe command on your keyboard. INC for include, EX for exclude. Will then show you only the policies that include whatever text you put in there, so that you can identify if you might have 100 or 1,000 rules in a large firewall. You can use this pipe include exclude to narrow down your list of policies to identify the policy number that you want to take a look at. On the web, there's a search function within policies, which you can then designate all kinds of restrictions, from zone to zone, services, etc., and search then for the policy you think is involved in the traffic you're troubleshooting. We'll take a quick look again at the steps in running debug flow. Basic. You first need to get any flow filters that are in operation and remove them if they don't apply to the troubleshooting you're going to do. Then you need to set your flow filter for the traffic that you need to capture and observe. Then you need to enter debug flow basic. Clear the current buffer so that the new traffic you send in here is the first traffic you see. Send the traffic you want to capture. Turn off debug, and then get the buffer, debuff stream, to show you what's in there. And of course, when you're completed with the troubleshooting process, you're going to unset your flow filters. So this process is your basic troubleshooting for pretty much everything flow-wise that's going to go through the firewall to see what's happening in zone-to-zone traffic. Very helpful because it follows that packet through the whole flow. Now, policy drops. These are some messages you might see in that debug flow then, and policy searching global policy, packet drop denied by policy. This will mean that we've reached the global policy, which means no policy has applied to this traffic. So what that's telling you basically is that you don't have policies configured that match this traffic. So you need to look closely at your addresses and your ports and your source and your destination zones and find out why no policy is, this is going through your entire rule set off to the global and being dropped. Nothing's happening to this traffic because it doesn't match anything you've configured. So configure a policy for it. This is the next message you might see. Coming in, incoming and outgoing interface are the same zone. Searching global policy, packet denied by policy. You have intrazone blocking enabled and a policy not available for this. So if you're coming in and out the same interface, you're on the same zone. By default, when you create zones, intrazone traffic is automatically permitted, except on the untrust zone that comes pre-configured on branch devices. If you see this message, your intrazone blocking is enabled, and you need to create a intrazone policy, trust to trust, untrust to untrust, to allow that traffic. Another utility that's available is called Snoop. Snoop is essentially a packet capture. This allows viewing of the packet details, and it is not available with ASIC model ScreenOSs. This can only see traffic that's on the CPU. So if you're familiar with using packet capture utilities as a debugging tool, and you want to continue to use that method rather than a flow method of troubleshooting, then Snoop is the equivalent utility to a packet capture on ScreenOS. You can do this on either egress or ingress ports to capture them, and you can configure filters so you don't have to look at absolutely everything that's transiting the interface. You can do this packet capture to the console, but it can be very CPU intensive, so you generally want to run this to the buffer, and it'll run to that same debug buffer when you use the Snoop utility. So if you like packet capture and that's your method of troubleshooting, then Snoop is the equivalent utility on ScreenOS. Snoop info will show you what's configured on the firewall for active filters and the like. And in this case, you can see that nothing's configured for it. There are a number of filtering options. So if you do Snoop filter and question mark, it shows you everything that you can use to filter the types of packets that you're going to look at, and then even within Ethernet, which is primarily where you're probably going to use this, there's a lot of filtering options to make sure you're capturing the packets you need to examine. Snoop again is packet capturing, so this is most helpful if you're examining packets, say leaving a computer or a server, and you want to see what they look like on arrival at the firewall. This is the tool that will get that done for you. IP is the keyword for IP address to do the filters. So destination or source IP filters can be added in the Snoop. And then here's an example output of running some ping after configuring a Snoop filter for that IP address in the previous slide. We can see that those packets are there on the B Group 1 interface that we did this capture on. Okay, so wrapping up our basic policy operations and configuration. We reviewed what is the functionality of policies on ScreenOS. You should understand what all these elements are in a policy and how they get used in creating those policies. You should understand the common problems you're going to see with policy operations and ordering. You should understand when the global policy applies, and you should know how to verify the use of, through the use of debug and Snoop, that policies are working as they expected. So these are the goals for this particular session. If you do have questions, feel free to post public questions or comments or expansions in the forum area on the class site, or definitely feel free to contact me directly if you have any questions on the material presented. I thank you very much for your kind attention and your time and going through this session on basic policy configuration for the ScreenOS firewalls.